Anyone else craving routine? Maybe it's the smell of freshly sharpened pencils, or perhaps just a quiet house where all of the children have gone back to school. Just me? I didn't think so either. It's back to school time and we need to chat. Well, hello friend, I'm Mary Beth with At What Cost, where simple living and deep faith go hand in hand. And a little bit later on in the video, I'm going to tackle a really tough question about whether or not we should be sending our kids back or homeschooling. So stick around to the end of the video if you want to know how I feel about that. So it's important to recognize that there is a whole lot of stuff going on for our kids during this time. New teachers, new friends, maybe new bus routines, maybe even new schools. There's a lot of change happening at that beginning of the year time. And although it's exciting, I know my kids certainly love this time of year, and I certainly love this time of year. It can be somewhat stressful. Now add all of these kind of extra things that we're facing with this particular back to school season. We really can have a lot of stress both on us and our kids. And it's important to remember that. They don't vocalize stress the same way we do. They're not going to come home and say, "Wow, Mom, I had a really stressful day." They're going to come home and they're probably going to be not very nice to you or someone else. The fact of the matter is they just don't have the same level of coping skills that we do. And to be honest, I mean, you probably know some adults that don't have real great coping skills either. It can be really tempting to treat this time like it's a brand new start, almost like a second New Year's resolution, but that gets focused on our kids more than ourselves. Now, I'm sure you're like me and you don't completely leave yourself off of this second chance at a New Year's resolution list, but it does tend to be at one of those milestones where we take advantage of the season to implement a lot of new routines and habits. Maybe it's chore charts, organizing systems, meal planning systems, shopping systems, like a lot of systems, right? We want everything to be streamlined. We've come out of this time of sometimes chaos during the summer. It's okay to call it that. And we don't have a lot of routines. We look at this marker of back to school time as the time that we can start to implement all of this stuff. Now, I totally went wrong with this a few years ago when I tried to implement all of these tasks. I wanted our morning routine to go a certain way, and although the tasks themselves weren't all that difficult and I really felt like my kids could do it, I realized early on that I had not laid enough groundwork down to be able to implement all of those systems. So although back to school time may not be the best time to start a clean slate, fresh start, it is a great time for us to consider goals that we want to work on over a longer period of time. So if your kids have not yet gone back to school, now is the time to start setting some of these goals together and coming up with a little tentative guideline of how you're going to do it. Maybe one of the things you'd like for them to do is to pack their own lunch. This is a great time a few weeks out to let them get into the habit. We want to make sure that the things that we're expecting our kids to do, they're actually prepared for. If your child is not familiar with the kitchen and making their own meals and snacks, the first day of school ain't the day to do it, friend. They don't know what to do and the best way to do it, and you're probably again like me and you want things done a certain way, or at least within some narrow guidelines. You want to start early, giving them the skills to be able to do the work that you expect them to do later on once school actually starts. And the same thing goes for setting out their clothes the night before, or at least making sure that they have all of the things that they need. I highly recommend my go-to clothing organizer that I will leave in the description below. This came from another YouTuber, Work Life Glue, and it's just a total game changer. No more arguments about what we're going to wear in the morning, and no more question about whether or not anyone has laundry to actually wear. If the organizer is full, then we're good to go. And if your kids have already gone back, like mine have, praise the Lord. Or they're going back in the next week, well, it's time to do a little damage control, mama, because at this point, you just want to make sure that all of your little ducks are in the pond. Whether or not they're in a row, well, that's a whole other story. I give you full permission to back off the expectations just a little bit until everyone gets a little bit more settled in. So what can we do to ease the transition during that first day or that first week? My first tip is to meal plan. Even if you're not a big meal planner, at least for the first few days, if not the first week, figure out what you're going to have and how you need to get it done. Maybe, if you have time, make a few meals ahead so that you can just pop them into the oven right before dinner. People are going to be hungry, they're likely going to be a little cranky, and this is not the time to wing it. Kind of along the same lines, catch up on laundry, at least a week's worth of laundry, so that in the morning time, nobody is digging through the laundry pile looking for a matching pair of socks, or maybe even just socks in general. Now, I highly recommend reducing wardrobes, but if you're not at that stage yet, at least get that first week's worth of laundry done so that you can get it washed, dried, sorted, and in the drawers, folded or not. Now, an unlikely tip is to do the dishes. Seriously, like every night. And bonus points if you can get them through the dishwasher and put away before you go to bed. Now, why is this important to our back to school week? Well, it's a stress reducer. If you have a clean slate in the morning when it comes to your dishes, there's a place for all those breakfast dishes to go, which means all of the lunch or dinner dishes are also going to have a place to go, and you aren't going to be stacked up with all kinds of stuff in the kitchen and feeling a little stressed out every time you look in there. Now, if you're able to get your kids' school supply lists ahead of time, and I think nowadays most places are, they usually post it on their website, and even some of the superstores around our area will have lists for each grade level in the store in the back to school area. I also received a notice this year that our school would be selling back to school kits, and let me tell you, I now wish that I would have done that because it would have made our back to school shopping that much easier to do. Now, it wasn't difficult. We do try to shop in advance as soon as those lists come out. I know sometimes they'll hand those lists out at open house, but 2 days or a day before school starts, I mean, we're just asking to be in those half-empty aisles with all of the other stressed out parents and kids that can't decide between Charlie Brown and Lisa Frank. It really can be a stressful time if we don't do a little prep work. Now, if you're in a pinch and you just didn't have any other option but to shop for back to school supplies a little bit late, like maybe you had exposure and so you had to quarantine for 10 days and you couldn't leave the house, and it just so happened to be 3 days before school started and you've been really stressed out. This isn't the time to look for the absolute best deal on crayons. Maybe you just have to bite the bullet and get what they have. And at the end of the day, it's gonna be all right. Just a little side note here. Don't freak out if you can't get everything right when they start school that day. The chances of them actually doing all of the things that they're going to need all of the supplies for that first week of school are actually pretty low. It's okay if you have to send in half of what was on the list this week and the other half next week. It's going to be all right. Now, the same thing goes for wardrobes. If you have time ahead of time to do some school shopping and update their wardrobes, I know that was always a fun time of year for my brother and I. We only really got new clothes a couple of times a year, and so we looked forward to that time of having a couple of new outfits. But at the same time, if everybody's got clothes to wear and shoes to wear, you're doing okay. Now, let me take a minute and talk about book bags. This is not at all sponsored by Pottery Barn Kids, but I kind of wish it was, because when it comes to book bags, pencil bags, lunch boxes, they have got it covered. Now, this is just my own personal experience, but we have been using the same Mackenzie Pottery Barn Kids book bags and lunch boxes for the last 4+ years. And they wash up great, they hold up great, and I have 3 boys that are pretty hard on things. In fact, our youngest is where hand-me-downs go to disintegrate because he's so rough on things. But these Pottery Barn book bags have held up. So they are a little bit of an investment, but you can spend the money up front and get a good quality item, or you can struggle to find another $10 backpack halfway through the school year when they've ripped apart and they don't sell them anymore. So it's kind of a toss-up. Again, it's really just up to your own experience. If you have some that you love, great. If not, then I highly recommend those Pottery Barn Kids book bags. And last but not least, breathe. Just breathe. You know, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Maybe take twice as long to breathe out as you do to breathe in. This can be a stressful time of year. And everyone knows when we're stressed out, well, it kind of stresses everybody else out too. And so with all of the changes and things that are happening, it can be difficult to know whether or not you're making the right choices about things, or if you have gotten all of the things that you need to. Your kids may not be happy about all of the things that you have gotten or not gotten, or chose to do or didn't choose to do. And the tempers can really start to flare. This is a time to just slow down and breathe. Go for a walk and see if you just need a little bit of time to get yourself back together, because nobody wants mom to be a hot, screaming mess. Trust me. None of them. And bonus tip, get those kids to bed on time. I know it can be hard to push that bedtime up once they have been out for summer and maybe staying up a little bit later, but doing that in small increments over time can really help. And the same thing goes for getting them up in the morning. You can use small increments over just a couple of days or weeks to help kind of adjust some of those sleep patterns. We also start to back off of the screen time and implement more time with reading books before bed, or just kind of settling down a little bit sooner than we had been. Now, the big question about my opinion on going back to school or homeschooling. So I recently put up a post in our community tab asking what was hanging you up with back to school, because I know that this can be a difficult time of year for people. And I got a lot of the typical questions that I anticipated, but I also had another question come up about my opinion on sending kids back to school with everything that's going on in the world, everything that is still going on in the world. By now, everyone is familiar with this now almost, year and a half long just roller coaster ride of trying to figure out what to do with our kids. What's the best decision? How do we make the best decision? Who has the right information? And where do we go from here? So let me give you just the blunt answer here. I'm not going to give you my opinion on this, mostly because I think that's what's causing a lot of the confusion in this, is that we're all searching for some answer. We want to know the nitty-gritty, final, soup to nuts end. What should we do? And unfortunately, whether it's my opinion or somebody else's opinion, I don't know that we're going to find that answer. What I can offer you is some encouragement and a couple of reminders. So, first reminder, if you're asking your school for all of the information about how they're going to handle everything in the coming school year and they are not getting back with you, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that it's not because they want you to be miserable and they don't want you to have the information. There's a pretty good chance they may not even know. Things are changing on a pretty regular basis when it comes to how we should do this, that, or the other. In fact, in some cases, it changes like on the daily. So taking a step back and really thinking through what would work best for your family is a great place to start. And I know it's hard. It's hard to figure out what's the right way to do this, what's the right way to do that, where can I compromise, where do I not compromise, and ultimately we can find ourselves getting really wound up in wanting to have control over a situation that unfortunately, we just don't have that much control over. And when it comes right down to it, we're not making these decisions from a necessarily calm, cool, collected kind of place. I think y'all know how much I love the book of 1 Peter, and it can oftentimes be my go-to, especially in times where we really feel like we're suffering. And you know what? It's okay to call this suffering. You want to do the best for your kids. You don't know what that is. And we can oftentimes find ourselves going to a place of trying to control the universe. And so I love this verse in 1 Peter chapter 5, right here in verse 6. And I'll just be honest, this is hard to hear sometimes, but we're going to do it anyway. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be the dominion forever and ever. Amen. Now, friends, Peter here is writing to a specific group of people who are suffering in a very specific way. But this is really meant for the church as a whole. And it's true. We do have an enemy that is seeking to destroy us. And ultimately, that looks like trying to pull us further and further away from peace and contentment in knowing that regardless of the outcome, whether we desire that outcome or not, God is in control. We can trust him. We can trust in his plan. And even when it doesn't feel good or pleasing to us, that doesn't mean it isn't good and pleasing to God. And oftentimes in these times of struggle and trials, we're tempted to try and take control of the reins when ultimately we can demonstrate God's glory in all of this. And despite things being difficult, this is another opportunity for us to just give all the glory and praise to God because he does care for us. There have been times over the past year and a half that have been incredibly difficult for our family. Incredibly difficult. Trials that have been more difficult to face than I think anything that we've ever faced as a family, and certainly anything that Brian and I have ever faced before being a family. This is a time also when we have had some of the most sweet and tender moments just getting through this trial. So rest assured that regardless of the decision that you make, this is an opportunity for you to draw closer to the Lord and really depend on Him in helping you to make this decision and to take all of that anxiety out of it. Allow the Spirit to lead in your decision and rest knowing that God is going to care for you. And He's going to care for all of our little ones too. He really is. You can trust Him. And if you have not yet put your trust in Him, I would love to talk with you more about that. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.